I wish the best for your son, and I wish you good health, and your case is dismissed.
A devastating diagnosis hit him just as his family discovered something shocking about his years on the bench. Critics had been whispering for months about what really happened behind the cameras. His son, David, knew the truth, but stayed silent. The final months revealed secrets that made his cancer battle look easy. What his family found in his private files will break your heart. He was born on November 24, 1936 in a freezing tenement on Federal Hill in Providence, Rhode Island. They called it a cold water flat because there was no hot running water. Just a pot-bellied stove for heat, oven door cracked open for extra warmth, and trips across the street to the public bathhouse to get a hot shower. Frank Caprio was the second of three boys raised by Antonio and Filomena Caprio, who didn't have much, but somehow made that cramped apartment feel full of love. They didn't measure wealth by things. They measured it by togetherness. That warmth held the family close through bitter winters and harder days. His father, Antonio, came from Taino, Italy with a 7th grade education and no money. To keep the family afloat during the Depression, he sold fruit door-to-door from a wooden cart and delivered milk all over the city. He'd wake Frank and his brother at 4 a.m. to help on the milk route, telling them, "If you don't want to do this forever, stay in school." He refused to stop delivering milk to families with kids, even if they couldn't pay. He just covered the cost himself. And somehow, after years of hard labor, he taught himself psychology and became a published author. His mother, Filomena, born to Neapolitan immigrants, was the quiet hero. She never ate at a restaurant. Never bought herself a dress unless it was absolutely necessary. She skipped prenatal care just to save a few dollars. Yet, she was known across the neighborhood for helping others, even when they had barely enough for themselves. In 2018, Frank named his charitable foundation after her, the Filomena Fund, to honor that spirit of giving. At age 10, Frank Caprio started shining shoes on the sidewalks of Federal Hill. For nickels and dimes, he polished the scuffed leather of men who'd lost their jobs, fathers struggling to feed their kids, immigrants who didn't speak English. He listened more than he spoke. Heard stories of pain, pride, and perseverance. He also delivered newspapers before sunrise, even in the snow. No shortcuts, no complaints. He learned early that work wasn't something to escape. It was something that built dignity. By his teenage years, he was juggling 3 jobs. Washing dishes in diners, delivering papers, and helping his father deliver milk before dawn. Even with blistered hands and no sleep, he showed up to school and wrestled his way to the Rhode Island State Championship in 1953. Providence College. He kept the same grind going. He cleaned cars, worked Sunday 2 a.m. shifts assembling newspapers at the Providence Journal, and paid every dollar of tuition himself. He graduated in 1958 with a Bachelor of Science degree. At the ceremony, his father cried. The man who delivered milk in silence watched his son earn what he never could. Frank then started teaching American government at Hope High School. He loved it, but he wanted more. He wanted to practice law, but he couldn't afford to quit teaching. So, he came up with a brutal plan. Every day after school let out at 3:30, he drove 50 m to Suffolk University Law School in Boston. He attended night classes, came back home after 10 p.m., slept a little, and got up again to teach. He did that for 7 years. He finally graduated in 1965 with a law degree, becoming the first professional in his family. While in law school, he worked as a legal clerk in Providence. The files he handled weren't glamorous. Petty theft, parking violations, broken families, people struggling just to live. He read their stories late into the night. Stories that stayed with him. The law wasn't just a system to him. It was a mirror of people's real lives. In 1965, at 28, he opened his own firm, Caprio and Caprio, on the exact land where his mother and aunts had once lived. His sons, Frank Jr. and David, would later join him there along with cousin Anthony. The building wasn't just an office. It was a full-circle moment, but his public life had already begun. In 1962, At just 25, he defeated a powerful longtime incumbent to win a seat on the Providence City Council, representing the same neighborhood where he shined shoes. His speeches were fiery, his energy relentless. During one of his campaigns in 1966, a street brawl broke out between nearly 400 supporters and had to be broken up by 25 policemen. Still, Frank won re-election. He ran for lieutenant governor in 1968, then for attorney general in 1970, earning 43.3% of the vote against a Republican opponent. He didn't win that race. But he wasn't done. Even before his legal career took off, Caprio had already served 8 years in the U.S. Army Reserve and Rhode Island National Guard as part of the 876th Combat Engineer Battalion. He started in 1954 training at Camp Varnum and Fort Indiantown Gap. He credited that service with helping form his moral compass, something that would define him in the courtroom later. He never missed a veterans event, even in his final years battling pancreatic cancer. Through all this, wrestling remained a part of his story. After his 1953 championship win at Central High School, he returned to coach at Hope High, the same school where he taught. He was teaching, coaching, and attending law school at the same time. Wrestling gave him something deeper than strength. It taught him discipline, fairness, and how to keep going when the odds weren't in your favor. He knew what it felt like to start at the bottom. And that's why when people came into his courtroom decades later, broke, scared, ashamed, he didn't see criminals. He saw humans. And he remembered the shoeshiner who used Tocmeal on cold sidewalks in Providence, listening to stories from people just trying to survive. That boy never left him. At 25, Frank Caprio stunned everyone when he won a seat on the Providence City Council, defeating a long-serving council president in 1962. He wasn't a polished politician. He was just a kid from Federal Hill who believed in listening more than talking. His campaign was rooted in the neighborhood where he grew up, close enough that you could smell the same bakery his mother used to walk by every morning. And when he opened his law office years later in the Caprio building, it stood on the very ground where his mother and aunts once lived, just a few hundred feet from his childhood home. Everything stayed close. By the time he was 49, he had built a thriving law practice. But then something shifted. In 1985, Mayor Joseph Powino Jr. offered him a seat on the Providence Municipal Court. Frank took it. That bench would become his home for the next 38 years. Nobody expected what would come next. When he was quietly promoted to chief judge around 1990, most assumed he'd run things the old way, but he didn't. He rearranged court schedules so that people didn't have to skip work to fight a parking ticket. He asked questions, real ones, not to trap people, but to understand them. He let people talk. Some broke down, others brought their kids, a woman with cancer, a man sleeping in his car. He didn't trust them. He listened. One of those stories came in November 2020. Tisha Miller showed up in court with her little girl, Jamiah, barely holding it together. She was homeless, living in her car, trying to survive with fibromyalgia while raising her daughter. Viewers wondered, was the judge swayed? Was justice turning into entertainment? Arguments broke out online, but people kept watching. Ratings didn't drop, they spiked. Caprio had become more than a judge. He was a figure people debated at dinner tables. Then came 2016, a moment that would change everything. A 96-year-old man named Victor Kwa came to court for a speeding ticket. He looked fragile, but his story hit hard. He had been driving his 63-year-old son to cancer treatment and didn't want to be late. He never drove. But that day, he had to. Caprio listened, then said, "You are a good man. You really are what America is all about." That clip spread like wildfire. Over 50 million views. No music, no effects, just truth. The world saw it and paused. A father taking care of his son, a judge who understood. That moment defined Frank Caprio for millions who'd never even heard of Providence before. In 2018, TikTok found him. A woman stood before Caprio and blamed her unpaid fines on cursed jewelry. It sounded ridiculous. Caprio raised an eyebrow, but then she said she was fleeing domestic abuse. She had nothing but her jewelry and a few bags. No home, no help. Caprio dropped the fines. Then he offered her shelter, contacts, resources, support. That video reached over 100 million impressions in days. People didn't just watch it, they shared it, they talked about it. They started seeing court as more than a punishment chamber. By 2019, the show had partnered with Facebook Watch. Over 2 billion views came in by 2023, but it wasn't the cameras or platforms that kept people hooked. It was the way Caprio looked people in the eye. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, a nurse stood before him, ticketed for running a red light. She had just finished a 16-hour double shift. She was tired. She didn't even realize what's done. Caprio talked to his officers, dismissed the ticket, then her. The clip spread fast. Frontline workers saw it as a tribute. Everyday people saw it as hope. But 2021 wasn't all applause. That year, a clip went viral showing Caprio being lenient toward a repeat offender caught stealing. The man had a gambling addiction. Social media turned. Critics said Caprio was going soft, too forgiving, too naive. But then news broke that Caprio had secretly funded the man's rehab. No cameras, no press release, just quiet action. The same critics came back with apologies. That moment reminded everyone watching that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was also about repair. Then in February 2025, Caprio released Compassion in the Court, a book filled with 50 untold stories from his bench. One story stood out, a 2015 case involving a homeless veteran who got a parking ticket, but the ticket was just the surface. Underneath it was untreated PTSD, lost paperwork, missed VA appointments. Caprio helped him apply for benefits, connected him to the right people. The fine was erased. His life started to rebuild. The book wasn't just a memoir. It was a map of what justice could look like if it had a heart. In 1965, Frank Caprio married Joyce, and nothing in his life was ever the same. He had met her during a whirlwind courtship in Providence's Italian-American neighborhood. And once they were together, they never drifted apart. For more than 60 years, Joyce sat quietly in the background of Frank's life, sometimes in the court gallery, sometimes in the audience of his speeches, but always close enough for him to feel her presence. She rarely spoke to the press, rarely sought attention. But Frank spoke of her often. He called her the incredible woman who gave him the greatest gift of all, their 5 children. And when he said it, he meant it. They raised their family in Federal Hill, where dinner wasn't just about food, but about listening. Their table became a small courtroom of its own, filled with lessons about justice, kindness, and the importance of hearing someone out. The children, Frank, T., David, John, Paul, and Marissa, grew up hearing stories about defendants who had made mistakes but were given a second chance. They saw their father shine shoes, wash dishes, put himself through school. They saw their mother keep the family stable, especially when politics made life uncertain. Years later, one of their sons, David, would help turn those stories into something much bigger. Millions of people would watch Caught in Providence. But the values behind it started at home. Joyce protected that home fiercely. In the 1960s, when Frank was a city councilor, he was offered bribes more than once. Joyce made sure he didn't take them. She watched the books, kept things clean, made sure their family's name was something their kids could carry with pride. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. Her strength was the kind that held things up without being seen. When things got hard, and they did, she reminded him who he was. Frank was a wrestler in high school. He won a state title in 1953, and he never let go of that part of himself. Even in his ADS, he was still wrestling with his grandkids, playfully pinning them on weekends and telling them stories about his courtroom. Not just funny stories, but real ones about people who were struggling and the decisions that had to be made. His granddaughter Sophia remembered how he would lean in and tell them gently to always stay close to their friends and to be kind. These weren't just visits. They were lessons, they were legacy. Not every day was easy. In the 1990s, Frank dismissed a case. Days later, the defendant took their own life. He couldn't sleep after that. He'd lie awake at night, turning the decision over in his mind. He talked to David. Eventually, the family went to therapy together.